Yep, I think we're live now. Okay, great. So welcome and thank you to everyone that is watching this live stream on whatever social platform it may be. And a very warm welcome to our speakers that we have present today for this debrief on the European education area midterm review. So I know that we don't have much time today, just an hour. So I'm just going to quickly run through the agenda for today. To start off, we have a brief introduction of Quest, this organization. Quest, who I'm representing as well, is bringing you this discussion panel. So for those who don't know Quest, are not familiar with Quest yet, just like to do a really quick introduction. Following that, we'll have a presentation from Gabrielle, our very own policy officer, on the current state of the European education area, followed by a discussion panel with our three lovely guests today. So yeah, my name is Ellen Smith and I'm the Quest membership officer. So yeah, just going to take 3 minutes to quickly present Quest. Quest is a European network based in Brussels that exists to bridge different educational change makers across Europe. And these educational change makers are schools or are organizations from the wider educational or training community. And what they have in common is they all practice innovative or progressive pedagogies. So we bring them together because we want to promote the practices that they are applying. We want to bring visibility to these innovative methodologies. We want to research them and we want to advocate for them at a European level. So our mission is inherently to just transform the educational system for the better. But in doing so, we have a very holistic approach. So we work on democratic education, on inclusive education, and on sustainability within education. And these areas of work all sort of come together in the inherent ambition of really treasuring that inner drive to learn from the student. Our strategy is fourfold. So as I mentioned, we perform research on innovative educational practices. We seek to actively practice them as well in concrete projects. We promote them and we network because, as I said, we are a network of different members. Yeah, we have about 45 members now from across 22 countries, and they are all members for free. So yeah, the Quest membership is entirely free. And in becoming a member, you receive the following benefits: more information about projects and funding opportunities, plenty of networking opportunities. You're in the loop for the latest educational policy updates and research developments, but also access to plenty of free trainings and events. All in all, becoming a member means that you also commit to promoting and developing more democratic, inclusive, and regenerative education in Europe. So we have several meeting points exclusive to members, and these are member forums that are divided in several topics, just so we have really specific topics of conversation that are relevant for specific members. Okay, so I think I'll leave it here just so we can bring it back to the educational European educational area. I'm going to stop sharing so Gabrielle can take over.
All right, do you see my presentation? Perfect. So good evening, everyone. We're just going to go quickly through the European education area, what it is, how it came to be, and so far the achievements and points of improvements, so that we will afterwards discuss with our panel of experts about the rest of the European education area and what can be done. So before the European education area, we had other different frameworks at the education level, at the EU level, and one of them was the Education and Training 2010, which was already seeing education as a way for the EU to become the most competitive and dynamic knowledge-based economy, capable of sustainable economic growth with more and better jobs and greater social cohesion. So it was based on 3 different principles, or key priorities: 1, increasing the quality and effectiveness of education and training systems in the European Union; 2, facilitating the access of all to education and training systems; and 3, opening up education and training systems to the wider world. So you already had at this stage a focus on inclusive education, quality education, and education as promoting both openness to the world and the competitiveness of the EU. After 2010, we've had the Education and Training 2020, which was funded on or based on 4 key priorities. 1, making lifelong learning and mobility a reality; improving the quality and efficiency of education and training; promoting equity, social cohesion, and active citizenship; and finally, enhancing creativity and innovation, including entrepreneurship in all levels of education and training. After 2020, we've had some sort of renewed need to have a framework to promote cooperation at the EU level on the theme of education. And so therefore, this is why we've had the European education area. So it was born in 2021 through 2 council resolutions. The first one creating its framework, its strategic framework for 2021-2030, and the second one setting its governance structure. So as you can see in here, you have already some priorities that you can find back in the former frameworks, such as promoting quality and inclusive education, or mobility and lifelong learning. And you have in some way as well a little bit of openness to the world, which was taken to another step with education as promoting the geopolitical dimension of the EU. But apart from that, you have also other new priorities, such as viewing education as promoting the green and digital transitions, which are priorities set by the EU Commission, and enhancing the competence and motivation of the teachers and trainers, especially in a context where teachers are lacking, where we have shortages, and where there's a lack of attractiveness of the profession, which leads to teachers leaving as well. So the overall objective is to build a more resilient and inclusive education and training system to make quality education and lifelong learning a reality for all in the European Union. How does it work? So we have so far the Education, Youth, Culture and Sport Council, which is part of the Council of the EU, which has the political lead on the European education area. And so it is made of member states ministers, which define the frameworks, the strategic frameworks, and propose recommendations on how to implement this European education area at the national stages. We also have the high-level group on education and training, which is supported by the EU Commission and brings about more precise strategic exchanges between member states. Every year, we also have the European Education Summit, which is the place for discussion and gathering around the achievements and next steps of the European education area. It's also the opportunity to launch new initiatives and new, EU-level initiatives and consultations. And we have 7 expert groups, which I will go a little bit more in depth afterwards, but they regroup member states experts, and more globally, civil society, social partners, international organizations on more specific topics linked to education. We also have online tools and communities which allow for exchanges of good practices, of learning opportunities and networking opportunities, and also access to funding to a variety of education actors. So you have, for instance, the European Education Area portal or the Digital Europe program, to just name a few. So within those 7 working groups, as I've just stated, you have well, actually all of those that are written there. So on different topics such as adult learning, digital education, learning for the green transition, schools, equity and values in education. So all of them try to promote cooperation on education, and so its implementation at the state level. To be able to evaluate the European education area and to be able to monitor it, 7 EU level targets were set by 2030. So some of them you'll see are aimed at 2025 and others to be achieved at 2030. So you have, for instance, 96% of children between 3 years old and the starting age for compulsory education that should participate in early childhood education and care. We're also aiming for less than 9% of early leavers from education and training, for at least 60% of vocational education and training graduates benefiting from work-based exposure during their vocational education training, and also about at least 45% attainment in tertiary education. Here you find the 3 last ones. So on making sure that at least 47% of 25-64 years old received training in the previous 12 months, reducing the level of low achieving 15 years old to 15% in reading, mathematics, and science, and reducing as well low achieving 8th graders in computer and information literacy to less than 15%. So they're quite ambitious, and they're to be taken at the EU levels on a larger scale. So now today, where are we? To start with, within the 14 strategic initiatives that the Commission has committed to lead during this European education area, we've already adopted 8. So it's a pretty positive picture once you look from this perspective. You've had some on inclusive education, such as the framework of inclusion measures for the Erasmus Plus and the European Solidarity Corps, or the Council recommendation on pathways to school success. You have some others on mobility or on higher education, such as the European Strategy for Universities. And you've had some as well on the green transition, such as the Council recommendation on learning for the green transition and sustainable development. You've had also a number of other EU level actions. I'm not going to cite them all. There are plenty. This is just a small snapshot of them. But you have, for instance, the Education for Climate Coalition, which brings together education experts to promote green skills and climate education at the EU level. And you have the Girls and Women in STEM and ICT, which promotes digital and entrepreneurial skills within these fields, which are usually more where you find less women still today. So where are we in terms of EU level targets? It's also relatively positive. We've reached our target number 3 in terms of VET graduates benefiting from exposure to work-based learning during their studies and training. And we're on a good way, even though we still need more efforts to reaching target number 1 with 93% and the objective of 96% of children being in childhood education and care. And we're also about to reach target number 2. However, here we can see more gender disparities with a higher number of boys and men in general being part of the early leavers from education. And you can see gender disparities as well in target number 4, where you see more women attaining tertiary education. So we also have to improve in terms of our target number 6, and I'll go back on target number 5 and target number 7 a bit later. But so when you go a little bit closer, however, we have a mixed picture with high differences in terms of implementation of the European education area between the member states. So you'll see it through the different graphs that we'll go through, and socioeconomic background still affecting education outcomes today. So to give you some examples, today young people from disadvantaged, socioeconomic disadvantaged backgrounds are 6 times more likely to underachieve at age 15, which also suggests that there are some transgenerational transmission of education disadvantage, and we'll also see that a bit later while talking about adult learning. Another example is that young people whose parents have a low level of education are 9 times more likely to leave education prematurely, and are about 49% less likely to attain tertiary education. So it has an important effect at the EU level on education outcomes. And this is why we've seen a new equity indicator that was set at the EU level in 2022. And so this indicator compares the severe educational underachievement between populations having a socioeconomic, coming from a disadvantaged socioeconomic background with underachievement of people coming from a socioeconomic advantaged backgrounds. Yes. In terms of school disengagement overall, we've had positive trends in the past 10 years of decline, but however, we still have 3.1 million young early school leavers and around 3% of all 15 years old that are not enrolled in the national education system. And here you can really see the difference between member states, where you have some member states who are more around 15% of their 15 years old not being enrolled in national education, while others are more around 1 or 2%. And this is a trend that you see on several aspects. We also see disparities along lifelong learning, especially in rural areas where learning at an adult age is not as accessible to people with low level of education. And as you can see in here, you have high disparities between of exposure to non-formal learning between people having had a low level of education and people having had a high educational attainment. I was talking earlier about transgenerational transmission of education outcomes. It's also the case in adult learning, as adults with a low level of education whose parents have also had, have had a high education level are 4 times more likely to participate in learning in their adult life than people who have had low level of education and have their parents also having had low level of education before. In terms of adult learning as well, and this is part of the EU level targets, adult learning in the preceding 4 weeks has increased, so we're now around 12%, but it's still much less prevalent among people with low level of education and people living in rural areas, for which the numbers are respectively around 4% and around 8%. So we've not seen a decreased growing gender gap. On the contrary, we've actually seen a growing one with, as we've seen with the EU level around tertiary education attainments, women are more numbered in terms of, well, have a higher access or at least a higher attainment of tertiary education compared to men. And we still see persisting gender stereotypes influencing study choices. So men are still underrepresented in a variety of fields such as education, where they only represent about 21%, health and welfare, where they represent around 28%, arts and humanities, 35%, and social sciences, journalism, and information, where they represent 35% as well. Well, women are underrepresented in STEM subjects, so science, technology, and engineering and mathematics, and they only represent around 31% of the students there. We're still lagging behind as well in terms of digital skills adoption, with not a single member having reached the EU level target of at least 80% of 16 to 74 years old reporting basic digital skills, which puts us backward in terms of achieving the overall goal that the Commission sets of preparing the EU towards a digitally fit EU for the digital age. And in terms of green skills and sustainability, there's still more work and efforts to be done as well, especially in the creation of knowledge and awareness. For instance, in terms of the environmental sustainability is only taken or as a cross-curricular theme in just under half of the member states. And even more, we've seen a report, a 2022 report from the Commission and the OECD, which stated the clear link between gender and socioeconomic disparities with sustainability awareness and knowledge. And so from this report, the conclusions were that students from disadvantaged socioeconomic background are, one, less likely to care about the environment, two, to be aware about the environmental problems, to engage in pro-environmental behaviors, and also have lower levels of achievements in science. So there's a couple of other points that we can see quickly around the European education area. There's no EU level target for soft skills or citizenship education. And even if we do speak about innovative pedagogies, they're still slow to develop at the EU level and rather marginalized. And there could be more done in terms of children agency and promoting children's active, meaningful participation. There's also divide, which can be seen in terms of strategic discussions between the education and employment sector in order to promote, well, and there's more need to promote the idea of education influencing and granting the skills on the long term for the employment sector, and how we can actually work more on it. So what are the next steps for the European education area? We've just had the midterm review process, and on the 30th of October, we will have the European Education Summit. We will have one as well in 2024, and by 2025, we would have a full report of the European education area, which would allow us to build on it and see what can be done afterwards. Out of the 14, we also have the last six strategic initiatives to be adopted, mostly on digital education and higher education, with one as well on mobility. And we still have time, and we should promote or push forwards more efforts to reach these EU level targets, to promote so innovative pedagogies and children and youth active, meaningful participation, as well as teachers and students' well-being overall. So now I will invite our speakers today to discuss about the European education area and what they believe could be furthered. So we have today Martina Baron, CEO of Quest and part of the UDEC Council. We have Andre Frank, Policy and Advocacy Coordinator at Lifelong Learning Platform, and George De Fula, Professor at Middlesex University and researcher on education technologies. I would like to invite you to, if you want, present yourself in a couple of words first, and your organization. Martina, do you want to start?
Thank you, Gabrielle. I guess introduction of my organization would be redundant because Helen already did it quite well. Therefore, I can introduce myself, but as you said, I'm the CEO of Quest, coordinating our team. I have more an academic background, and therefore my passion in Quest relies really in research activities that we do, working on democratic education, sociocracy, and most nature education at Quest. At the same time, I'm also head of research at EUDEC, so the European Democratic Education community. So I'm happy to be there to give maybe more Quest perspective in the EEA midterm review. Thanks.
Thank you, Martina. Andre, would you like to take the floor?
Sure. Thanks, Gabrielle, and thanks to all of you at Quest for giving us the chance. It's great to speak with you and with your community. I am for about 1 year and a half, the policy and advocacy coordinator in the Lifelong Learning Platform. Prior to this, I had part of a 5-year experience in the Brussels bubble, working with the European teacher trade unions and with other members of the Lifelong Learning Platform, Solidar Foundation, and social justice on education and training. So it's mostly a education advocacy type of background that I have. And maybe it's more interesting to present the platform because of how varied, large, diverse it is. It's a network of networks. That's the interesting aspect about the Lifelong Learning Platform. We have 44 EU NGO networks that are members, and then they themselves have their own national members. We promote lifelong learning in a very holistic manner. From your presentation, much of the way the Commission talks about lifelong learning is linked with adult education, whereas our perspective is more about connecting all of the types of sectors, level, formats of education. And within this process, it becomes a lifelong learning approach, starting from early childhood education and care, going through compulsory education, higher education, adult and senior education, but also connecting with the formal, informal, and non-formal learning environments. So our membership can be parents associations, teacher students union, vocational education and training centers, higher education institutions, networks, volunteering centers, and so on and so forth. And I think our perspective could feed in today mostly because LLLP as a voice for the European civil society in education and training has been frequently part of the European education area processes, whether we're talking about the different working groups, whether we're talking about the midterm review event on the 10th of October, and then the entire process, and also the upcoming education summit on the 30th of November. So looking forward to our conversation, and a pleasure to be here.
Thank you. George, would you like to present yourself as well?
Yes, of course. Thank you very much, Gabrielle. And as before, I hope that my background noise is not too annoying for the followers. That's good. I'm trying to mute everyone with this microphone. I'm a professor of information systems and business computing, but my passion is education. So I spent all my life finding out how digital technologies can enhance the learning experience of my students, but also lifelong learning through training. And I have used various vehicles from the European Union funding, and especially Erasmus+. So a couple of projects that might be of interest is the Skills Match project that we use the DigiComp Edu framework to help educators into advancing their learning skill sets. The Sharing My Learning project helped 5 different countries to create a network of students where we have peer support. So that's the use of social learning networks for students to help each other across borders. And to name a couple of more, we use in the I Like It 2 project, which we're finishing now. We created a kind of a Zoom-like platform that it is also incorporates a Kahoot system. So you do assessment as you speak, as you teach your students through Zoom. And we've gone into a little bit more crazy projects with Carcraft, which is the Minecraft game used to teach students how combustion engines work. So the European Union area, it has so many vehicles, so many opportunities for academics to work on. But also we have to consider of how innovation will move on. So some of the things that we do at Middlesex and maybe in future meetings like this we could present is we're using the Internet of Things sensor. So we have our own in-house sensor to measure your heartbeat and sweat levels while you're presenting or you're talking to your tutor or with other students. So that's biometrics. And also we use a lot of augmented reality of how to support students. So these are the, if you like, the two main areas that, I bring to the discussion. Really excited to be here. And thanks again for the invitation.
Thank you very much. I propose that we go on the first question. So I have one question each, but feel free if you have any comment to add as well to the other's answer, and then a more general one that we can go through afterwards. Martina, I'll start with you. What is your perception of the European education area, and how well do you think innovative pedagogies are integrated within it? You're muted.
Now, do you hear me? Yes. Thank you. Well, I think, as you said, a very big road has been made along the course of these years, and we can see and evaluate the success of many EU targets and indicators. The EEA started from the understanding that basically the educational institutions, schools, and university need to evolve and to being able to educate students to be successful in this complex and interconnected world that we are facing. Observing that traditional and current education system was not helping children to be equipped with the necessary competences that this challenging world is bringing them. And this is not only the starting point of the EEA. If you look, for instance, at EU Life Competences Framework for School Education, it was clearing said that there was need to find alternative pedagogies to allow children really to get different skills and to allow teachers to being able to bring all the different key EU key competencies, because the current system was actually not working. So that was the point of departure, and the four innovative pedagogies is definitely present in all aspects of the European educational area. And we can see that the way education is perceived in this sense, it's a very holistic system. And so we have quite an innovation in the way that EU is portraying learning and education, that it's kind of similar to how UNESCO look at it in the future of education. We can particularly see it in the initiative Pathway to School Success, because it's the one that target most, of course, schools. And then we can see that, the school success there is considering 3 dimensions. We have engagement, achievement, and well-being. So we are not just talking about achievement, but the part of belonging and engagement is fundamental. And this is considered to the precondition that we know that high level of dropout, very low level of sense of belonging was one of the major points that you needed to tackle. And the importance of well-being, it's also very much integrated. So in this sense, I think that the strategy relies on very innovative pedagogies. It calls for a whole school approach. So the idea that the school is not a island, but the school needs absolutely to be connected with the external world and reality. So open schooling should be a must for every school. And mostly it's anchored in a learner-centered approach, which is almost given for granted if you read the papers, that it's fundamental that the education should be tailor-made to the learner, including the four active and interactive techniques. This is also supported by very important statistics and data that I think should be extremely relevant for states to look at. Inclusion is also promoting a very large perspective, understanding the importance of individualized approach for students to reach inclusion. Another innovative thing is that finally we also look at how punishment measures in schools are detrimental for education. We'll, for instance, look about repetition grades as something that it's absolutely should be avoided. So we start promoting psychologically safe environment for learner as a basis to learn. So this is really, really important, and I think it's completely embedded with, let's say, innovative, progressive pedagogies. However, I think that the points that we need to look at, and maybe we will look for in the next discussion, is are the means deployed by the EEA enough for this precondition and enough for actually this statement about the importance of innovative pedagogies, and are the criteria of assessment also coherent with this standpoint? Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm going to turn towards Andre. I think Martina touched a little bit upon it, but I'm going to ask a relatively similar question. How do you feel that the European education area promotes lifelong learning in a holistic approach?
Thanks for the question. I was agreeing a lot with Martina on what she was saying about pathways to school success and a lot of the reforms that came with the European education area. It's been a true meaningful change in a sense, and it's been past few years that in general social policies have been a bit, including education, a bit better reflected at EU level. But then I was also happy that we moved into the however territory a bit, because it's in short, in a nutshell, I'm not sure if lifelong learning is really promoted in a holistic way within the European education area. We've done a significant amount of advocacy work to bring lifelong learning as a term on the political agenda and in the way we've understood it. So less about it being restricted to adult education, but as I've said, this broad perspective that connects each type of learning experience and sees how the learner can be supported within coming and going and leaving different types of learning formats. So part of this reference to lifelong learning clearly appears, let's say, in the Council recommendation on key competences for lifelong learning. This came a bit before the European education area, but it sets the scene for this way of innovatively thinking about a competences-oriented type of learning rather than achievement in terms of hard numbers of being enrolled in school or being part of the labor market after graduation and so on and so forth. Then the European education area per se, it does try to connect the different learning sectors, mostly within formal education and a bit independent from adult education, but still it does promote transversal topics through it, such as digital, sustainability, inclusion. There are milestones achieved through it. The whole school approach is being encouraged, and through this way, civil society then is welcomed into the process. There's been experts from the civil society part of the working groups working together in this promotion of lifelong learning within. But the problem, I think, rests sometimes at, well, there's a two-pronged reference to this problem. On one side, it's a bit of the siloization within the European Commission. And then on the other side, it's a bit falling on the member states' implementation of the European education area. So speaking of the silos, we've had this year the European Year of Skills. And instinctively, I would have said it's very much connected to the European education area, very much connected to learning. Turns out it's not as connected because it was foreseen as a competence of the side of the Commission working with employment and with adult learning, independent from the European education area. So there was a lot of talk this year about skills, technical skills, specifically for the labor market. And it's a bit incoherent when you think about the great competence frameworks that the Commission has developed through the European education area and before in the past, where competences were prioritized. So that means knowledge and attitudes together with skills, not just skills. And even when talking about skills, it was far broader than just the technical ones for the labor market. So in this way, you promote a holistic vision of lifelong learning. If you connect all of these competences better, not if you try to just spotlight one thing because you have an emergency on the labor market, let's say. But then still, it's very much connected to formal education, the way that the European education area is approached. And sometimes that's a missed opportunity, especially for those most disadvantaged learners, in terms of how they can be better caught by some of the civil society organizations that we represent, by some of the stakeholders working in the sector. Informal and non-formal learning are very, very important contexts to develop civic competences, to develop learning to learn competence, sustainability competences, and to actually actualize all of these competences on a daily basis. But we see that the validation of these competences is not quite prioritized in the agenda of the European education area sufficiently. And then basically this all leads to what I've mentioned about member states implementation. It's member states keep insisting that this is a competence of theirs, which it is true, but to a certain extent, they do agree on these documentation that the European education area provides. It is the most watered down version possible, since there needs to be agreement across all of the EU member states whenever a council recommendation or an initiative of the European education area is published. So if this lowest common denominator on which all member states have agreed is not implemented, we do see a problem over there. So I think much more work needs to be done in the coming stage on the implementation of the opportunities for innovation that we have, because it's been rewarding to work within the working groups of the European Commission, just as an example, on developing a lot of these council recommendations and the innovative perspectives over it. But now we need to move away further from the written word into action, actually. So thanks.
Thank you, Andre. I'm gonna talking about innovative pedagogies or innovative ways of bringing education. George, how do you see the European education area in promoting digital and innovative education?
Okay, thank you very much for your question, Gabriel. I have to say that I find it so easy to follow Martina's and Andrei's points, because actually we're moving towards, indeed, we are at crossroads. There's so much change around us, and the European area has actually has transformed. Personally, I have been affected a lot by Brexit, which actually affected us nationally, but also affected the European Union and how I work under other partners. The first thing that we need to consider is that we are currently at the fourth industrial revolution, which, and I'm doing a lot of keynotes on education 4.0, which means that education now has to be in line with the volatility of the industry sector. And that means that we have to gradually move away from the old-fashioned 3/4 years undergraduate programs, 12, 24 months postgraduate programs, and so on. In the UK, we invest a lot in apprenticeships, and actually that is a form of lifelong learning, and how that actually can create more relevant educational opportunities for people who are already at work. But how do we deal with those students who still want to go through the traditional pathway? How do we help them? Something that I've come across for more than 5-6 years now, and I'm trying to introduce in the UK, is the introduction of micro-learning opportunities. When we hear micro-learning, a lot of people think that we're going to replace, if you like, the 3-year of a bachelor degree or a 4-year in Europe with lots of bits and pieces. It's not necessarily that. However, we have to consider, if somebody starts learning if somebody starts the learning process now, they have 4 years before they graduate for undergraduate students. And by the end of these 4 years, certain skills may become obsolete already because technology has actually moved on. So the integration of micro-learning, if you like, as an opportunity to offer alternative experience and additional experiences, that is something that we can go through there and we can investigate. Focusing on the EU, I would say that we have to consider the two main vehicles that we have, which is the Digital Education Action Plan. And we need to move away from thinking that's an action plan. It's just yet another bureaucratic EU policy making exercises. We need to make sure that this is fully aligned with the needs of the education system. And of course, we have the European Digital Education Hub, and that is similar to what actually Quest is doing, which is really admirable. What you have, you bring people together. So the hub, the European hub, will have to bring people together with different experiences. Why am I saying that? The skill sets required in the south of Europe are so different from the ones required or northwestern Europe, if you like. We have to consider how much the significant proportion of refugees and immigrants have actually altered the needs of the education system, especially if you see that we're all about integration, and diversity now is becoming even more challenging with the cultural mix and the cultural diversity we have. So if we go back to, if you like, the Digital Education Action Plan, what we should focus is, like, first of all, on the first priority, which is creating an ecosystem. So as an ecosystem, we need to go to the different states and identify the priorities to see where we're going to invest in the different actions of priority one. Because in certain parts of the European Union area, you may have the need for digital skills that they are very practical, because you need to integrate a big proportion of people who are looking for practical skills, while in other areas you may have to focus mostly on digital transformation of more old-fashioned skill sets. Also, we need to consider the second priority, which is the digital competencies. We need frameworks like the Digital Competence Educational Framework to be completely aligned with the industry, which means that the same way that I've done in my project, I had the 6 areas of the DG Comp Edu, and I tried to align them in the teaching sector using my university, and it worked. Whilst in certain other areas, we may introduce frameworks that are not necessarily driven by industry at the local level in terms of the different kind of countries. So one of the, just try to conclude, I would say one of the things that we need to consider is emphasis more on European digital skill certificates, but not like the exercise of, if you like, the computer driving license. I mean, that worked, but now we're talking about the more complicated skill sets. So we need to find ways where the sectors drive, if you like, the education in terms of what is relevant, how digital technology will be incorporated in educational pedagogies. And we may need to be a little bit more flexible for a change. We may be considering a little bit of more flexibility on the state of how this transformation is going to be incorporated, because we have such a volatile area. So I hope I did not go over time. That's my view. Thank you.
That was perfect in terms of time. Thank you very much. I feel that we have some sort of common narrative of there's a recognition for change and for innovative whole system education and lifelong as well. But now it's how do we put it into place? And so my next question is actually linked to this. It's what improvements would you like to see happening within the European education area? And what do you think would be needed to see these changes occur? And I'll start with Andre with this one.
Thank you. There's a big wish list over there. So let's see what I can prioritize first. But look, I've mentioned already a bit about policy coherence that I like to see over there. Many times when they work on adult education, is not necessarily that linked with European education area. Many times when there's work happening in the, for example, on the, George was mentioning the European Digital Skills Certificate. There's much work happening right now on it, but it's not always connected with what is happening, let's say, in the coalition for the education for climate, for example. There's that transfer of, okay, how do you develop sustainability competences in relation to your digital ones, it's not always the bridge. The bridge is not always there. So I think there needs to be a bit more policy coherence. They came out with 40 actions, how you connect them, and how you then connect them with the skills agenda and with the work of the other directors generals. And then that I would prioritize would be the governance of the European education area. For the moment, it's the member states that meet in council formations, and then they agree upon whatever the Commission has drafted. It's true that the Commission does lengthy consultations, but at the same time, there are ways. It is written in the governance framework that the European civil society and different networks should be present in the highest meetings of the informal groups in European area to be able to drive the agenda, but also present what is happening on the ground if the implementation is working well, and hold the member states accountable, because the midterm review that happened at EU level did not happen at national level. And that was supposed to happen. So if we really are meaningful about it, we need to monitor constantly how exactly the European education area is translated and support member states with easy ways of translating whatever has been developed into their national curricula, into their teacher training programs, into their partnerships with the stakeholders at national level. So I would insist significantly on these two.
Thank you very much. George, would you like to give your feedback as well on this question?
Yeah, if I may go with a few priorities, if you like, because we're talking about entrepreneurship, innovation. I think that we need to revise the term quality when it relates to education. I would say the element of quality is like usually what it comes to mind is the number of times I've been in projects talking about the European standard guidelines and what we need to go through universities, and nobody's talking about quality in terms of how successful we are into integrating digital technologies into teaching students, because the students have to apply digital technologies in doing their daily jobs. I mean, I struggle to find any sector that doesn't have at least a bit of technology in there. So I think we need to revise the term quality when it comes to education. The second thing that I really need to stress upon is the equity rather than equality between the different students. And we have to consider, first of all, it was a very interesting slide that you showed about the gender gap. And I think that the gender gap will also be affected in the future. And I go back to my point about immigration and refugees. The reason is that we're becoming more mixed societies where parts of the society will work towards gender equity, while new parts of society may find it more difficult to adjust because there is a cultural gap there. So that is a challenge that we have to consider a lot, especially when it comes to diversity aspects. When it comes to educational and training policies, I totally agree with Andrei that sometimes they're a little bit disjointed from other priorities. So I think we need to consider the element of green transition, because everybody's talking about green. It's fantastic. If you'll see most of the proposals we write, you say, do we do that? Is that education and that's green, or can we? And they're not separate things. We need to consider. One of the keynotes that I recently gave is how by changing, how e-learning can be good or bad for the environment. And a lot of people think, oh, if we do remote teaching, that's good for the environment. They don't realize that the equipment, the technology, the server, that absorbs electricity, and that may actually not be so good if you have small numbers of students. And the final part is, again, educational cooperation. I think that we need to go back into a frame of mind that we need to understand from different states what are their priorities. At the moment, the European, we have a lot of synergies, but still we need to see how these requirements change, because skill sets requirements are completely different from between the different states. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'll pass to Martina for final word on this question.
Thank you, Gabrielle. Well, I think most of the point Andrei and George raised, I really agree with them. So for me, it's a matter of coherence. Firstly, coherence with what's written there and how do we implement, but also how do we evaluate. And that's something that I was touching before, and I think you put in your slide as well. So if the EU level targets are focusing about only achievers regarding reading, math, science, or digital, it already gives us a sign of the fact that there is still a very strong hierarchy in skills, which is not that is very disconnected towards the 8 key competencies, and how the evolution of competences is actually promoted by the same EU. And so how do we make that soft skills can finally be considered and involved into these targets, so that we actually manage to achieve an education system that takes care of the well-being and of this whole approach, not only on cognitive skills. So for me, that's a very important point that that needs to be considered. And the other, it's also in the implementation, of course, with the member states. So that's just fundamental. And I agree with Andrew that so far states are really the missing actors, unfortunately. And so when we read many strategies, it seems that educational system, it's already so developed and modern. And then you talk with member state, and they have a completely another perspective on that. So I think what needs to be done is giving structural recommendations that are really clear for every member state. And this is not present there. Again, if I give the example of the Pathway to School Success Initiative, it's not enough to give few examples of best practices. I think a really very profound study of every national educational system, and how we can implement the EEA in every member state needs to be done, and a constant monitoring. Otherwise, all this work would be lost.
Thank you. Amazing answers from everyone. What I gather is the lack of concrete implementation and transversality, and as well involvement of all the different member states in there as well. Where I'm going to jump a little bit further, where soon to be 2025, and so we're soon going to have the final reports. What do you envision for a post European education area? I know it's still very in the future and maybe broad as a question, but if you already have some ideas, I'd be happy to hear your perspective. And I'll start with George if you'd like.
Actually, I think I'm gonna probably plagiarize here, which shouldn't as an academic, but actually OECD is actually their framework is going up to 2030, and I'm pretty sure that the European Union we're gonna just have another framework coming up. What I really see, and I have to say that those of our listeners or our viewers who are not familiar with, if they go to oecd.org and they look for the Learning Framework 2030, they will see how knowledge, skills, attitudes, and values, they are combined into competencies. And these competencies, in order to be developed, they require, if you like, that kind of ecosystem that brings key stakeholders. And by key stakeholders, they mention parents, teachers, peers, and communities. And I think this is what we need to consider. We need to consider how we can enable students, learners of any age, from anything from primary school up to lifelong learning. So we should make this an adaptable, flexible model where learners themselves will become peer support, members of a peer support community. This is what we try to do with the Sharing My Learning. So we need to move away from, we have moved away from the old-fashioned, I'm the teacher, I teach my students, and so on. With Web 2 technologies and social learning networks, we have moved away from that. And considering now that we're teaching millennials, and considering also that Generation Z has arrived and we changed the pedagogies, I think we have reached the point where we need to create ecosystems where the policy can actually be adapted to the different learning groups. So a policy should have kind of a filter that allows it to remain relevant when we have different kind of learning communities in our focus. So I think what we're gonna move into an era where policies will be very dynamic, And we cannot afford to go through a stage where we'll say, we're going to have the next 5 years to do a pilot and so on. Policies have to have an element of the flexibility and volatility to adapt into the changing environment. That's my view. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Martina, would you like to build on George's perception?
Sure. I think I'm gonna just bring more pedagogical focus in there, because if your question is what you would like to see, then I'm gonna maybe get a little bit more utopistic there. I think the fact of bringing a learner-centered approach, or as George was putting it, enable learners to have a peer support community. It's already a very strong point. What I would like to see as a next one is actually to bring self-directed education within consideration. And this is, for me, fundamental. It's something that has been never taken in consideration in policy. It's actually in educational policy, and actually it has been really marginalized or suppressed as an educational method. But I think that if we really want to achieve the comprehensive skill that our world requires, there is no other best pedagogical method to do it than bringing self-directed education on the surface. So I would really like to see more of this. I would really like to see this as a way of promoting much more flexibility in state curriculums, because for me it still remain one of the key obstacles in promoting this comprehensive approach to education in states. So those are really self-directed education and flexible curriculum, or even not ex-ante curriculum, but rather ex-post, would be for me the two ideal points that I would like to see in the future. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Andre, would you like to give a final opinion about the question?
Sure, I can add a few things. I'll say first that the self-directed learning is a big part of our upcoming position paper on key competences for all. And so we're in full agreement here that self-directed learning should be the way forward. Maybe I'll also link with what George was saying. I think George is very optimistic about the Commission having an upcoming strategy. You never know with this sector. This current commission was on the verge of not having a commissioner for education. We would have been called the commissioner for innovation. Took a bit of advocacy during the public hearings of appointing the commissioner to change a bit the name of the portfolio. So first of all, I do hope that there will be a post-2025 framework. And then secondly, what I'll mention is, again, related to member states. It's time to push them and to insist on the implementation, which means that we need some kind of indicators and monitoring that forces the member states to take action in this direction. As Martina was raising already, an option is always to look at the snapshot of EU targets within the Education and Training Monitor, or consider the European semester, where recommendations are made on member states to direct funding specifically on reforms, or EU funding is cut for member states if they don't take action in the direction of those reforms. So over there, if we can have some indicators that go more broad than just participation in learning, and actually consider well-being, consider the type of competences acquired, consider the engagement of the entire learning community around a learner, then yeah, I think this would be very, very important for post-2025 to have such indicators to move forward now. Thanks.
Thank you very much. I'll leave the space. I don't know, Ellen, if we have any question on the live. If not, I would invite you, if you have any last words that you would like to say in response to any of the comments. Is that good? Yeah, perfect. Then thank you very much for this panel discussion. It was incredibly interesting, I found. And if there is no more comment about it, then I would say that we could end this this discussion in here. And promoted later on. But for today, I think this was a great moment of sharing and yeah, discussion about the European education area. So thank you very much. And I think, yeah.
Thank you, Gabrielle.
Thanks to you all.
Thank you very much.
Thanks.
Have a good day. Thank you.
Nice meeting you all as well.
Likewise.
Thanks. Bye.